In this video, we are going to be discussing layouts in Dreamweaver. I have a folder here that is from a publisher's resources. The book is called The Web Collection Revealed. I have that linked under the additional textbooks section in Blackboard. But what I have here are just some Word documents with content for my web page, because we know one of the things we can do for our project to get a head start is to start typing our content in Word documents. I have buttons. One of the things that you could also do to get started for the next phase of your project is to save all of the individual components from your mockup into individual GIFs or JPEGs or whatever format's the most appropriate for the content. Got a banner, background, just some images to work with. If we'd actually been doing this in the classroom, I would have stripped those off of a mock-up for us, but in consideration of time and so that I can demonstrate more of the actual formatting of the page, I'm just going to use these resources that are already existing. So when we go into Dreamweaver, we want more information than what we just have in our general welcome screen dialog box. So I'm going to go ahead and click on More. And there's another way to get to this screen as well. You can go to File and then New. When we create just a plain HTML page in Dreamweaver, we are picking what's already selected here, HTML with no layout. Dreamweaver, though, has a number of layouts, which can save us some time. And instead of starting from scratch, we would use one of the layouts that's already here for us and just make modifications so that the page, follows the format that we might have had in mind. So if you look in this section, under Layout, I'm in this third column on the page. First page is here, second page, third page, I'm on this area. I see layouts that are fixed, and I see layouts that are liquid. If we remember from our table discussion, or even from that discussion when we were just going over web background, liquid pages are defined based on %. They resize when the screen changes. They're more difficult to implement, but you can certainly choose that as well. We just want to think about consistency. So if you choose a liquid page, you also want to choose other elements that are liquid. For instance, your tables should be defined based on %. Fixed pages are more common, and instead of saying I want 10% of my screen for this element, they would say something like I want 100 pixels for this element. The most common layout is the 2-column fixed left sidebar header and footer. Notice when I selected that, we got a little preview of it on the far right-hand side. So you can select whatever suits you. For your project, you need to pick a layout that is either here in Dreamweaver by default, or you can start from scratch and define your own layout. And those are the only choices. For the project, we should not be going to third parties and getting layouts from other sources. We should either pick from here, or we should start from scratch. Now, in the Creative Cloud version, there are less choices for layouts. You might find that you're happy with, the choices that are there, or you might want to start your layout in CS6 in the classroom and then take it home and make the modifications there. Certainly would work that way as well. Also, when you're here, you're going to pick what version of HTML you're using. XHTML 1.0 transitional is the default in CS6 as well as CS5. CS6 and CS5. You might want to pick HTML5, and that's fine. Just be aware that you need to be consistent throughout all of your pages. Just remember what you've selected. And then you're going to choose where you want your CSS to be. Probably want to create a new file. Although at a later point we could talk about linking to an existing file, because Some people might have wanted to create their CSS file before they even came to this step. We'll go ahead though and pick create a new file. And I'm going to go ahead and click on create. It's going to ask me what I want to call this. I'm fine with this name. I'm actually just going to dispose or discard these files after I make the video. So we'll go ahead and save them there. Although if you were actually using this in your project, we would have created that site root folder and we would have made sure that all of this was, all of this actually would have by default been saving it into the site root folder. So you'll notice when you create this layout, there are a number of rules that are already defined. These are selectors. Some of them are things that we're used to, like body or H1. Some of them look a little bit different than what we're used to for our CSS selectors, but most of them follow naming conventions that are pretty easy to figure out, especially if you have a little bit of understanding of what's going on behind this within the code. Plus, if you were to select something, notice the property inspector is always going to reflect what's selected. So if I wanted to know what this was, notice now it says heading 1. What is logo replacement? Notice in the property inspector down here it says heading 3. So I can always use that to help me. What you will do once you've decided on your layout is we're going to go ahead and make changes to this page that correspond to how we want our finished page to look. So we're going to be making changes, based on our mockup. We've taken our mockup, we've stripped all of the individual elements off of the mockup, all of the graphics or anything we're going to put on the page, and we're going to be changing this template. Think about this as like a cookie cutter. We're going to change this to reflect all of the things that remain the same on all of our pages. So let me first go to the body. There's a few ways to edit this. I could add properties, or I could just double click and see the entire dialog box. I don't know why that didn't pop up. Okay, maybe it was just a problem with my mouse. I know you can please see up there that my mouse is, the battery's almost dead. So double clicking on this, as opposed to going down to the side here and clicking on add property, shows us all of the properties that Dreamweaver has defined. These aren't all of the CSS properties. Some CSS properties just aren't available. It's not that we can't do them. We could do them, but we have to add them manually. But if you're not familiar already with the properties and what you can do, you might want to just double click on the selector here and modify your properties, seeing what all the options were, because then it's like not having to remember, oh, the background color was under background, it was background / color or whatever. It's kind of refreshes your memory for you. So I'm going to go ahead and start adding a few things. I just changed my background image. I'm going to hit OK. Then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about changing this. So I changed my background image to this tile. Notice my background color, though, is still gray. And that means that if for some reason my image doesn't load, like let's say I forgot to put it up on the server, or somebody has a really slow internet connection, it takes a while to load, they would have actually seen the background in gray before they downloaded that tile. So generally it's a good idea to change the background color to something similar to your background image if you're using a background image. So I kind of find this green to be the predominant color of the background image. It's the one that appears the most. So I'll go ahead and just define my background color as that green. So if for some reason that image doesn't load, people instead, like let's say, here's a way that it could not load. I just misnamed the file. And at least people are seeing this instead of the gray. So I'll go back here and I will name my file correctly. So all we're going to do at this point is just go through and modify the CSS to correspond to how we want the page to appear. And when we do this, we might find that the selector is already defined for us, or we might find that we need to add additional selectors. So the sidebar, that's this area over here on the left. I might go ahead and add a property to this. Let me go ahead and maybe decrease the width of the page so you can see more of the page on my screen. So if you're familiar with the property, you can just add it over here. I do realize that the CSS Styles panel looks a little bit different in the Creative Cloud version. Unfortunately, I don't have a copy of that I can demonstrate with. So when you're doing this, everything that's not going to change needs to be included on this template. So your footer, for instance, the footer, which is right here, your footer is a great example of, oops, sorry, I thought I had double-clicked on that. Something that's probably not going to change. The footer is probably going to be consistent throughout the site. I'm going to pick a different color there. In fact, maybe I'll make it a little bit, let me see, you have your hex color codes already defined from phase 2, and you should have these on a post-it note and be typing them in from the post-it note. So that might be the content of my footer that I want to have on every single page. Anything that's never changing is what we're going to define here. So we also might want to define these I'm going to put a rollover image here. I'm getting those error messages because I haven't defined my site root folder. We should always put in alternative text. And the alternative text should make sense to somebody that's using a screen reader. This is a great example, by the way, of a time when it's helpful to know the code so that I can see what's actually going on in here. And what's happened is that I actually have more than I want. That should be right. Yep, there we go. In that particular tab. So there's a few differences in here, like the site root folder and these, my files not being defined relative to the site root folder. That's all just because I just wanted to get us started for the sake of the video. But you'll go ahead and make your changes. And let me just make a few more, like here, just to make sure. I think the reason I wasn't selecting what I wanted, I wanted to select the whole thing, link 1, and I had gotten off a little bit. That's why I ended up having that text and then the graphic after it. oops, I forgot to put my alternative text in there. And I also, okay. If you do forget to put in your alternative text, well, I have made an unintentional mistake here. I'm just going to stick with it right now, though. I don't want us to get too... Let's go back to the design view. If you forget to enter your alternative text, when you have the object selected, you can always do it in the property inspector. Usually I don't have a problem selecting that text and not having to make these edits after the fact. It might be my mouse, it might also just be the fact that I'm not using Mac on a daily basis, and that's just where I have the software to make the video. So there's another problem in here somehow. Okay, well, maybe I'll just come back to that because I don't want to clutter the video up with a lot of, troubleshooting for this particular page, especially since this isn't the page that we're going to be using. Anything that's not changing is everything that I'm going to go ahead and add here. When I go to my header, I don't know why I keep thinking that I'm double clicking, but maybe I'm just not clicking fast enough. This is another example, or we can do it after the fact, but another example of a place where we should change the background color anyway, even though we are planning to even though we're already planning to, pick this background image, because if for some reason the image doesn't load, we don't want somebody to be taken aback by some ugly color left on the page. Also, we always want to change all of these default Dreamweaver colors because anybody that's familiar with web design knows the default colors of the Dreamweaver template. So we definitely want to get rid of that. So we have a few problems with this background image. One is that this logo is here, and if I wasn't going to use that, I could delete it because my image here is based on the idea, the header was based on the idea of having a logo and then a banner or content to the side. The other issue, again, I don't know why I keep having that double click problem. I'm sorry about that. The other issue is that we probably don't want to repeat the banner. We only want it to appear once. It's looking for a particular property that I don't see here. I'll go ahead and add a little bit of padding to this. Actually, I'm going to add padding, and I'm going to add a border, just maybe a 3-pixel border, and I'm going to add a margin, because this is going to give you an idea of something called the box model, which is this idea that we could have padding, border, and margin around all of our elements. I still thought that I had a height. That's exactly what I wanted there. So ideally in my graphics application, I would have found out what the height was for my banner, and I could then decide what my height should be for my header. Obviously 200 is too big. I'm hoping that 100, if we cut that in half, it's not too small. You can just go ahead and hit apply. As you can see, there's a lot of just messing around with this. When you are working on this file, on this layout, you are going to spend, an excessive amount of time on this. I would not at all feel, maybe if I just center it, it'll resolve the issues about whether or not it was 100 or whatever. When you're working on this, I would not at all feel intimidated or embarrassed about the fact that you spend just hours on the layout. I mean, we have really just gotten started here, but anything on your page that's not going to change, it needs to be defined here. And it is very, very time consuming to work on the layout. Let's go ahead and look at a live view. And you can get an idea of what the page would look like in a browser. I still have a lot of work to do here. On the left-hand side, this sidebar, it's too big. If you notice the sidebar, I've got this extra area here. And I don't want to just fix this by changing the CSS for my rollovers, which would be, actually they're down here. Are these areas. I don't want to just change those. I actually want to change the width of the sidebar. And in a graphics application, I could have found this out. Oh, I forgot, I could actually just find this out in the property inspector. So if I click on my image, I don't know why I'm having trouble with that. But I can see that this one, I saw it in the live view there, that this one was 147 pixels. So maybe 150, maybe even 147 might be the width that I want to go to. I probably would have wanted to make this button, and these were just publisher data files. But if I had actually been, making this myself in Fireworks, I probably would have made this 150 to keep the math easier. Because as you see, we add margin, border, and padding to all of our items often. Like here in my sidebar, I have a little bit of padding. Obviously, you can see I have some padding because I'm not directly on the edge. So, generally we don't want to be directly on the edge, even if I go into my, nope. Sorry, I thought this one was container, but maybe it's content. Yep. So this is my main content area where it says instructions, this content here, 780 pixels in width. And we can see that that it has about 10 pixels of padding. So it's not directly on the edge here, which is probably what we want. We don't really want the text. Let me go ahead and put this 0 pixels of padding so you can see what I mean. Oops. Did it not? I wonder if it's because I'm in the live view. I wonder if that's my problem. No, it switched to 0. I don't know why it didn't. Maybe I have a margin defined around that sidebar. Let me just make sure this is actually, and this is another time when it's useful to know the code that you're looking at. Yeah, it is in an area called content. I don't know why that padding didn't. You don't have to write the unit if the number is 0, but just in case. Well, let's see what happens if I increase it, since it's not changing here. Okay, this is called a broken layout, what we see right now, and that means that I've actually exceeded the amount of space that I had. So this large area, the area that is not the striped background color, is container. Container is 960, and right now I have exceeded the size of my container. If I were to add up my sidebar, which was 180, and if I were to add up my content, the 780, I have exceeded the size of my container. So, yeah, so this one is 960, and it appears that the 180 plus the 780 are exactly 960, but my padding and margin can all change that size. So when I had less padding, it was fitting it because it's not actually 780. It's 780 with those components, with the padding and margin. All of that is taking out of it. So if I go back and add 0, you can see that now it fits in that component. So if I were to change my sidebar, let's say that I know that this one was 147, so I want to change my sidebar to be 150. Now it's moved over, if you notice this area. And now I also have to change these areas, my UL, because my navigation here is defined within a UL called nav. UL nav right here. So this is what's added, that extra space at the bottom. Oops, a little typo there, but now you can see what happens. I put an extra 1 there. Now you can see what happens when we do make a mistake there. So I went ahead and changed that to 150. I'm going to get rid of the padding. And now, if you go into live view, you can see exactly what's going on here. These are 147. My area now is 150, so I see this little 3-pixel area coming in from behind. Now, I do have an issue here. I've decreased this by 30 pixels, which means that this area, my container, my content, should have increased by 30 pixels. So this 780 should actually now be 810. And so you might start to wonder, like, why is this? Why is this actually happening where we have to change one and change the other? Well, we don't want to have a broken layout at the end of the day. And although we're viewing it in live view and we're getting a really good picture of how it might appear on the web, we could still have issues with different browsers as well. We would actually view that by going to File, Preview in Browser, and then we could look at the browsers that are installed on our machine. I could probably spend a couple hours making this video if I wanted to complete the template or the layout for this striped umbrella page. When you're working on your project, will probably take a few hours to get your layout together. And essentially what you're doing is you are modifying the CSS and you are putting in here everything that's always going to be the same. Let's say I always want to say this thing about mentioning the website. I always want to put this content in my footer. I always want to have this banner. I always want this background color. And when I say always, that means for a particular level. If you have level 0, level 1, level 2, you know, it's possible to have a different template for your level 1 and your level 2 pages. In fact, that's actually quite common. So you don't need to think about it as in, you know, that limiting sense. We could always also build a second template for another layer, but we don't have 7 of these. We kind of think about that cookie cutter mentality of what's always going to stay the same. So there's a lot more I could do to this page, colors and whatnot. I could define these headers. Right here, this is called a grouped selector, and that means H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, and H6 are all defined with the same rule. You can define multiple tags in one rule. So let's say that I were to change the font or change the color of my font. It would change it for all of these tags. Now you think, well, what if I don't want to include all of those? One is that I could remove them from the group selector, like I just removed the paragraph tag. It's no longer applying. Oh, you know what? I now understand what was happening with the padding now that I removed that. Remember when we were in the content and I removed the padding to 0 and I was wondering why the page didn't move over? Well, it turns out that padding was actually defined in the grouped selectors for the heading tags and paragraph tags. We had padding defined, and so that's where that had come from. So if I go back to the content area, I could, let's say, decrease this by 10, excuse me, make this 800 instead of 810, and then I'm going to add 5 pixels of padding because padding is going to be on all 4 sides. So now it's still at 810. Do you see how I kind of work with the math? That's why it's better to have round numbers for these images so that it just makes the math easier. So now I see this 5 pixels of padding in here. So it makes sense because I know that this one here, this was, I guess, 3 pixels, this green area. The 5 pixels is just a little bit bigger. Okay, so I deleted the paragraph tag from this group selector. But what if I actually wanted to add CSS for my paragraph? I'm going to go to New Rule. I'm going to pick my tag. I'm going to make sure that it's in my current file. Oops, excuse me, I want to pick tag up here. And for my color, I'm going to go ahead and pick, maybe I'll pick this orange. Okay, so notice this one changed as well. So it's because it's within a paragraph tag. And we got rid of the padding, which is why it's now over to the left. So there's a lot of customization here. And these were within a paragraph tag as well. So I'm going to do something different with the footer. Let's do something different with this. And I'm actually going to be either talking about this in class or making another video to talk about what's called the box model and CSS rules we can have other than the tags. But I'm going to go ahead and pick let's pick class. Say I want to center some of my text. It should actually be dot center, and I can't remember if Dreamweaver puts that in for us or not. Notice some of these with the dots preceding those. Okay, so I'm going to make all this text uppercase. It's a good idea to define that through CSS rather than just typing in the uppercase text, just for consistency, if you're thinking about uppercase, so that you don't have to think about, so that you don't have to think about making sure that you know, everything's typed in properly. The CSS just takes care of that for you. Now, I think it's under text align is, there we go, the property for centering. So now that I created this center class. This is actually called an independent class, so that we don't have to get too worried about the terminology in here because we're not writing the code ourselves, Dreamweaver's generating it for us. So I've selected this area, and where I pick my, no, I'm not able to use the drop down. Oh, I'm still in the live view. I make that mistake a lot. Always, you can't make edits in the live view. So here I could pick my center class, and I see that it's applied. In fact, I could do a few more things to my center rule. Maybe I want my center rule to be a different color, like, I'm just going to cancel out of this and scroll up so I can grab that pink because I don't actually have the, I'll just type it in since I'm having some problems with the mouse. Grab this pink. Okay, and we'll see that changed. So one of the interesting things about these center classes is that, or these independent classes, the ones that start with a dot, is that I can apply them to other areas. So let's say I want to apply it here. So this is a way of overruling the CSS that we've written for a particular tag. So we've gotten rid of the CSS that we wrote for the paragraph tag, which is what's used down here and up here, by applying this independent center class. Okay, so I know that this isn't the most aesthetic website, but let's just say now that we are finished with it. There's probably a number of other things that I would have wanted to do. Personally, I probably would have put a background color on content here. I would have resolved the I don't know that I even like that background color, but I might have put a background color on the entire container. In fact, personally, I like to make these two the same. You know, I like to make the container and the content the same. But I would have done that. I probably would have resolved some of these colors. They aren't, from a design perspective, we've got some problems with the colors, some problems with the contrast here and down here. I would have resolved this issue with the extra 2 pixels hanging out on my buttons. Probably would have spiced up this banner a little bit. Probably also would have put links in here. I would have also like linked this one to a page that I call about.html, or link this one to activities.html, all using the property inspector. But let's pretend that I'm done. When you are going to change content somewhere, which is probably going to be this area, I'm going to insert a template object. I'm going to pick an editable region. Doesn't matter what you name them as long as they are unique. Now this is an area where I could change the text. I could write new paragraphs. You know, I could change the text in this region. Otherwise, my cookie cutter, so to speak, is complete. So I'm going to go ahead and save this file. And I'm not going to save it with the HTML extension. I'm going to save it with an extension called DWT.